Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corn Productions here to talk about The X-Files, Season 1, Episode 13, titled Beyond the Sea. The episode's description reads as follows. Scully believes that the psychic predictions of a death row inmate are the only hope in the kidnapping of two college students. The episode was written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong. This is their fourth episode on this series. And the episode was directed by David Nutter. This is episode number 2 for him out of a total of 15. Funny story, I recently saw his name pop up directing episodes of Game of Thrones, a series I only recently started checking out, and yes, I know, I'm quite a bit behind the times on that one, and no, I'm probably not covering episodes of that series, even though I thought it was quite an enjoyable watch overall. And yeah, my thoughts on the finale, if there are any Game of Thrones fans here, yes, that was a pretty disappointing finale. It was really the lead-up episode into the finale that really kind of sank the ending of that series. Alright, so this episode originally aired on January 7th, 1994. Before we go any further, I'll tell you a couple of things. One, this is not a perfect podcast, so if you haven't watched the episode, I highly recommend you check it out, and then come back and give me a listen. Secondly, if you're listening on one of the platforms that this podcast is available on, please follow, and feel free to check out my YouTube channel, Corn Productions, where additional content can be discovered. If you're already on my YouTube channel, please like and share, and comment, and please subscribe to my channel. Alright, so this episode, bonafide classic. I'm almost kind of intimidated talking about it. Like, I don't think I can do this episode justice, because it really is a really great episode. It's a contender for the best episode of the season, no doubt about that one, and it actually is probably in at least the top 10 of the series altogether. Gillian Anderson cites this one as one of her favorite episodes. Chris Carter says that this is his favorite in Season 1, and I can definitely see why. Excellent performances from Gillian Anderson here. David Duchovny is good here too, but this is a Scully episode through and through. And while we're talking about performances, I cannot talk about that without also bringing up Brad Dourif as Luther Lee Boggs, who creates one of the great memorable characters of the series. Dourif, of course, has seemingly made a career out of playing these type of characters. He's got 174 credits. He was the voice of Chucky in the movies as well as the recent television show. He was Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings movies, and he was in Alien Resurrection sometimes the most enjoyable parts of that movie are because of him, and he was in a couple episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Internet Movie Database says that Chris Carter had to lobby hard for the casting of Brad Dourif as a serial killer, Luther Lee Boggs. Dourif was more expensive than the usual guest star, but Carter knew he would be perfect for the role. He rang Fox president Peter Roth at his home on Thanksgiving to plead his case. Roth agreed to it, mainly because he wanted to get back to his dinner. The network apparently was opposed to even doing this episode, as they felt it traded too much in the shadow of The Silence of the Lambs, which was in 1991, relatively close to this, and I think they were very, very wrong about that. The end product fully justifies its existence. As the episode begins, we are at Scully's house with her visiting parents. This is the first time in the series that the cold open begins with either Mulder or Scully, and it's sometime after Christmas, as her dad, who we are just meeting for the first time along with her mother, makes a joke about still having her Christmas tree up. Her dad is played by Don S. Davies, 150 credits for him, including Stargate SG-1 and its various spin-offs. He was in a couple of those. Twin Peaks and A League of Their Own. Speaking of Twin Peaks, Davies and Duchovny shared scenes together in that series, and they of course share none in this episode. Davies would come back for a Season 2 episode titled One Breath. He died on June 29th, 2008 at the age of 65. Meanwhile, Scully's mother Margaret is played by Sheila Larkin, 64 credits for her. She would make 17 appearances in this series, including one in the revival. The X-Files happened to be her last credit, in fact. Before she showed up in Season 10, she hadn't acted in 14 years. They call it a night. Her dad calls her the affectionate nickname of Starbuck, which will be important throughout this episode. Later that night, Scully wakes up and sees her dad sitting on the chair, silently mouthing words that she can't hear. She gets a call, turns back around, and he's gone. The phone call is from her mother, telling her that her dad is dead. She turns to the spot where she last saw her father, and credits. You know, it doesn't matter how many times I've watched that cold open, it still hits. After the credits, we see a young couple making out in a car. They are seemingly caught by a police officer who, as it turns out, is actually not a police officer at all, but the villain for this episode, who promptly kidnaps them. The kids, Liz and Jim, are played by Lisa Voltaggio. 15 credits for her. She would show up in Chris Carter's other series, Millennium. She was also in 98 episodes of General Hospital. Jim is played by Chad Willett. 63 credits for him, including a Good Doctor episode, and an episode of House, playing a CIA agent in a 4th season episode, Whatever It Takes. And I'm not a particular fan of that episode. I thought it was a weak season 4 entry. Mulder has a case. Scully makes a porn crack, basically saying that the last time she saw him that invested in something was when he was looking at porn. He's surprised to see her, thinking she wouldn't be in, and he calls her Dana. I remember my mom watching this episode with me and commenting that she had never heard him call her that before, and yet it's not exactly a very common thing. She claims to be fine. The case seems to be a serial one, and if the pattern holds out, they have 5 days to find the kids before they meet their end. Another serial killer, Luther Lee Boggs, is set to die in a gas chamber. He claims to have info on the case and described to a T info that only the family would have known. Boggs thinks that if his talents lead to a safe return of the kids, his sentence should be reduced to life. And Scully questions, what talents? Mulder says Boggs claims he received this info via psychic transmission. Scully believes that she detects a hint of skepticism from Mulder in something that would usually be right up his alley. And she is correct. Mulder is in fact skeptical, and in fact, they almost kind of switch roles in this episode. I mean, Scully won't admit it, but for the most part, she actually does believe in Boggs. Mulder's profile on Boggs is what led to catching him in the first place. He was almost gassed once, and he claims that his experience there activated his abilities. Mulder believes in psychic ability, but not in this case with Boggs. Mulder describes some of the horrible things that Boggs did, specifically to his family, and says some killers are products of society, some act out past abuses. In Boggs' case, he kills because he likes it. Boggs wants to talk to Mulder because he feels he's the only one who understands what he is. Scully wants to tag along to go talk to Boggs, but with the funeral being that afternoon, Mulder won't let her, as he gently and affectionately touches her face. We cut to the funeral, which is a small affair, which apparently is the way that her dad wanted it, just the family. Scully's ashes are being sprinkled into the water as his family watches on. Noticeably, we don't see Bill or Melissa, at least not the actors that will play them in Season 2 and beyond. Internet Movie Database says this could be the only time in the entire series in which you can see Scully's little brother Charles and probably his kids and wife. During the funeral scene, we see 2 men, 2 women, and 2 children, besides Scully and her mother, of course. This could be Bill, Melissa, and Charles, who were just recast as the series went along. We'll meet Melissa next season, and we won't see Bill until, I believe, Season 4. Despite being a major character, this is the 3rd time Charles Scully has been played by an uncredited actor. His 2nd appearance was in One Breath, and the 3rd is a voiceover in Home Again. Alright, so that last point that poster made on Internet Movie Database, I have to disagree with a little bit, in the sense that I don't really see Charles as a major character. He was important in the Home Again episode. That was an important plot point for that episode. But other than that, he was never really that important. So I'm not entirely sure what the person who wrote that actually meant. Scully asked her mother if her dad was proud of her, and Margaret can only say, he was your father. Alright, I don't know about you guys, but that answer would not be particularly satisfying to me. Maybe it's because my relationship with my dad isn't exactly close. I would not find that answer helpful, at all. Beyond the Sea is playing, and that's where this episode gets its title from. We cut to Boggs' first scene, and he's talking a bunch of nonsense. I really don't know what he's talking about, and I will not understand what he's talking about throughout the entire episode. I'm really curious as to where this takes place in the timeline, because initially, Mulder was going to go see Boggs alone, while Scully, of course, went to her funeral for her dad. So she was not supposed to be at the first meeting, but this kind of seems like the first meeting. I don't know why some of this wouldn't have been discussed during that first encounter with Mulder and Boggs, but Yeah, I guess it might have been. Boggs says that he wants a deal and redemption. His life for the whereabouts of the kid. In other words, he's looking for not a death sentence. Mulder says he wants to believe in one of the first times that phrase was uttered. I believe the last time, according to the Internet Movie Database, was in Conduit that they actually uttered the phrase, "I want to believe." But he isn't going to do so without proof. So he takes out a piece of fabric from an evidence bag and hands it to Boggs. And Boggs seemingly puts on a good show, suddenly having visions of the crime. But there's just one problem. That t-shirt had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. It was, in fact, a piece of Mulder's New York Knicks t-shirt. And I guess he didn't value that too much if he's willing to cut it up like that. This moment will actually be referred back to in a Season 3 episode with that guest starred Peter Boyle in Clyde Bruckman's Last Repose, which, by the way, is a great Season 3 entry. This is enough evidence for Mulder to pretty much consider Boggs a fraud, and I guess he pretty much already did, but now he feels like he has proof that Boggs is in fact faking it. So Mulder just leaves, and before Scully can do so, Boggs starts singing Beyond the Sea. It looks like Boggs turns into her father. Boggs asks her if he got her message and calls her Starbuck. This upsets her, and she runs past Mulder. Mulder asks if Boggs said something to her to upset her, but Scully says it's just grief. Mulder says she can go back to the hotel. Boggs is proved a fraud, and he'll try to get him to tell Mulder where the kids are in a few hours because Mulder believes Boggs is in league with the other serial killer. As Boggs walks by, he's singing Beyond the Sea. Scully leaves. She nopes out of that scene real quick, and Mulder watches her with concern. As Scully drives, she remembers Boggs' vision, talking about a waterfall, and she sees the Niagara Hotel, and then an Angel of Stone, which is something that happens to be right next to her. She drives down an alleyway, notices a door. She investigates and finds a necklace, some candles, and blood. I guess that's not a particularly good sign. We cut to Scully in her hotel room. Scully has flashes of her father. Mulder knocks on the door and enters. The bracelet was a positive ID. It was indeed linked to the girl. The police are searching the place but have yet to find anything. So Scully ends up admitting to Mulder that she lied to the police about how she found the building. She didn't witness suspicious activity. She admits she listened to Boggs, and this pisses Mulder off, and he starts chewing her out. Boggs could have been setting her up, that she could be dead right now. Mulder asks her why she felt the need to lie, and Scully says that she thought it would be a better explanation under the circumstances. Mulder sees straight through this, and basically says, in other words, she didn't want to be on record believing the psychic ability of Boggs, something their superiors would expect from spooky Mulder, but not from Dana Scully. Scully thought he would be pleased, her taking a chance on believing in the extreme possibilities. Mulder questions, well, why are you doing it with Boggs? He asks if it has something to do with her father, and the answer to that seems pretty obvious to me. He suggests if her judgment is clouded because her dad didn't approve of her line of work, then maybe she's putting herself in danger, and maybe she should back away from the job. I don't know if she's talking permanently, or if he means he should just take a leave of absence or something. She says she loves her job, and he says she loved her father. Okay. Mulder, you're kind of losing me here a bit with this particular line of argument. I think he's sort of right here, but also missing the mark at the same time in exactly how he's expressing what he's saying. He goes on to suggest to only believe in extreme possibilities when they are the truth. Okay, Mulder, that sounds profound, but how do you know what the truth is? How do you know, before you open yourself up to the possibilities, can you determine what the actual truth is? How can you open up yourself to the possibilities if you're not willing to find yourself wrong every once in a while? I mean, I think Mulder is in this episode. That's one criticism I have of the episode that isn't really a criticism, because I think it could have made the episode that much stronger, but since it's already like a bona fide classic, it's hard to complain about anything. But still, I think it would have been better if we were a little bit more subtle as to whether Boggs was telling the truth or not. Visually, the way we present this episode, it seems very much that Boggs does have psychic abilities. And I think it would have been better if we'd made that just a tad more ambiguous. But I think that we know that basically Scully is right in this episode, even though she doesn't want to admit to believing in Boggs, and Mulder is wrong. He calls Boggs the greatest of lies, and that he knows for a fact that he's working with someone on the outside. Later, in another scene, he shows up with a made-up article that he had planted in a newspaper about the kids being found, in hopes that Boggs would see the article and call his accomplice when he got phone privileges. Okay, I'm a tad bit uncomfortable with this. It seems a teensy-beensy bit unethical. For an example of my problem here, did you even tell the family that you were going to do this? Did you inform them that there's going to be a fake article in the newspaper about their missing children being found when in fact they have not been found? The media is basically full of crap anyway, so I'm not too worried about false stories being planted. But someone should certainly tell the family that what they are actually doing here. And they waited around the jail for 2 hours for Boggs to get his phone privileges, which seems unnecessary. Why not just come back around that time, rather than sitting at the prison for no reason for 2 hours? But yeah, Boggs ends up just straight up calling Mulder and asking him why he doesn't believe in him. So this whole ploy did not work. And for good measure, he ends up selling Scully out, basically saying that Scully does, in fact, believe in Boggs. And Scully basically just says, hey, look, it doesn't matter if he's full of crap or not. Like, in 3 days, the kids are going to die. And on top of that, the next day, Boggs will be executed, and he's the only connection to this case. So, we have to make a deal. Mulder ends up taking Scully's advice, because the next time we see him, he's talking to Boggs and trying to get details out of him. Eventually, Boggs ends up giving a location of a small boatyard in Jordan, and before they can leave, he warns Mulder to avoid the White Cross. We see the serial killer torturing the kids when the FBI enters with Mulder and Scully. Mulder ends up seeing a suspicious boat. He calls out that he's a federal agent and ends up getting shot. Scully, seeing this, says that there's an agent down, and I have to wonder here, was he not wearing a bulletproof vest, or did the bullet just go through? Internet Movie Database will point out that this is the first time in the series that Mulder is shot, but this pair will certainly not be strangers when it comes to the hospital. In fact, I think pretty much any regular character that appears in this series at some point or another ends up spending significant time at the hospital. I will say it's not quite like Smallville, which has at least one hospital scene per episode in that series. We see Mulder looking less than stellar, being treated by doctors. We're not really sure about his fate. The good news is that they were able to rescue the girl. Unfortunately, the boy is still within the serial killer's grasp, and the serial killer is still at large himself. The girl is looking through mugshots, and eventually she happens upon a picture that she recognizes. It turns out to be a serial killer named Lucas Henry. Internet Movie Database says there was an actual serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas, and there was an actual movie about him in 1986. Scully is told that they could never prove it in court, but Lucas Henry was a partner of Boggs. Scully goes to visit Boggs, and she does not have a very pleasant conversation with him. She accuses him of setting them up, and he actually looks kind of disturbed at the accusation. And she says that if Mulder dies because of his actions, there's not going to be anything to stop Scully from flipping the switch when it's time to execute Lee Boggs herself. We see a flash of him turning into Mulder, and I'm not really sure what that's about. Him turning into her father made sense because he was already dead, but Mulder is very much alive. And we see him basically say that, well, hey, you believed in me. Which I think is a way of insinuating that what happened to her partner was actually her fault. And she gets really upset here, saying that no, she does not, in fact, believe in Boggs. But that's pretty much her lying to herself more than anything else. Boggs says that he knows what she wants and to go ahead and ask. She very vulnerably says that she will believe him if he lets her talk to her dad. And Boggs seems to briefly let that happen, as he seems to transform into her father and he calls her Starbuck. She starts to get emotional, but Boggs seems to fight him off and says that he is not going to let that happen until he gets a deal. He's terrified to go back to the chair, and he goes on to describe how his family watched, his dead family, as ghosts, watched him, and they injected fear into him. Boggs says that it's a cold, dark place, and Mulder is looking into that place right now. In reply, Scully says, "It may be a dark place for Boggs, but not for her father nor Mulder." Boggs says, "I'm sure your father would like to tell you himself, but he won't until Boggs gets a deal. And if he dies, the boy will also go to that dark, cold place." Scully tries to get a deal from the judge, but the judge is not biting, and I can't really say that I blame him for that position. Scully visits Mulder at the hospital. Mulder doesn't want her to believe in him. He thinks that Boggs orchestrated the entire thing to get back at Mulder for catching him and sending him to the gas chamber. Scully thinks that maybe there's another explanation here, and Mulder says not to deal with him and become her next victim. Scully goes to Boggs and lies to him, tells him she in fact got his deal. Boggs eventually gives her a location of the Blue Devil Brewery. Scully starts to say if he was really psychic and he ends up finishing for her, he would have known that she lied. There is no deal, but he knows that she tried. Scully goes to leave, and Boggs says not to follow Henry to the devil, to leave that to him. And we see Henry about to kill the boy when Scully with the other agents arrives. A chase ensues. Henry goes off and ends up falling through a hole in the floor and dies. Scully looks up and sees a devil on the wall. After, Scully visits Boggs again, and she believes that if he had orchestrated those events, he would have warned Henry of the same danger that he warned Scully of. He saved Jim's life and her own. Boggs tells Scully that she is here for unfinished business, and he will in fact give her the message, but he won't do it now. He wants her to attend the execution that night and be his witness, and when she does so, he will give her the message. We cut to Boggs being led to his execution. He sees the ghostly figures of his family and he tries to turn back, but the guards make him go forward. The visitors are revealed, and Scully is not among them, which Boggs seems to react to with a quiet horror and sadness. He's asked if he has any final words, and because Scully is not there, he just quietly shakes his head no, on the verge of tears. And then we see the start of his execution. Scully could not bring herself to go and see Boggs and get the message. And I don't believe it's because she doesn't believe in Boggs. I'm pretty sure that she does believe Boggs. But when we see her visiting Mulder at the hospital, she starts to justify why she didn't go and see Boggs, why she didn't need to hear the message from her father. She starts to think that perhaps Boggs was a fraud, that she got all that information off the internet knowing that she was partnered with Mulder. And then Mulder gently asks her, why after all you've seen do you find it so hard to believe? And Scully admits to being afraid. Mulder asks her if she couldn't face up to that fear, and ended up risking not being able to hear what her last words from her father were. She says she already knows what those words were, and Mulder asks how, and she says it's because he's her father. Mulder and Scully gaze at each other, and she begins to cry, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is where the episode ends. Yeah, like I said, this is an absolutely fantastic, great episode of the series. There are no amount of words that I could say that would do justice to this series. So my recommendation, if you haven't already, is to go watch this episode because it is simply fantastic. It is the X-Files at its best. The next episode on the docket is Gender Bender. That should be interesting to talk about. I don't even think I've seen that episode since it first aired. I pretty much skip it upon rewatches every single time. As far as this video goes, that's pretty much all I have for you for this video. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join one of my Core Productions Facebook pages. You can buy something from the Core Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee. You can join the Core Productions membership for 99 cents a month. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Core Productions, signing off.